Hello, once again, this is Austin Wintory. This is the Game Maker's Notebook, and this is our first time, at least for me, doing a remote quarantine edition of the show. I am chatting with a composer who I've been eager to talk to for a long time. In fact, just in general, this was our first time ever speaking, even though I've admired his music from afar for the better part of 10 years now. His name is Olivier Deriviere, and he is known for scores like Remember Me, the upcoming Dying Light 2, Plague's Tale, the recent Streets of Rage 4, and the list goes on. And we talked at length, almost exclusively, about interactive music systems in games and the culture surrounding that with composers, with game developers, and even with the players themselves. So enjoy.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
I am here remotely. This is a novelty. Actually, there are several reasons why this edition of the Game Maker's Notebook is novel. This is the first time that we are recording this from afar and not sitting face to face, which is something I normally treasure about these recordings, but sadly is not the case today. This is a transatlantic episode of the show. But secondarily, this is also the first time that I have interviewed somebody where this is our first time having a true conversation. Every prior one of these, I have had the great pleasure of already knowing, in some cases very well, for over a decade. And this time it gets to be something new and fresh. And I feel like I will be able to get to know my wonderful guest here while everybody else is. So with that, Olivier, how are you, sir?
Good. Thank you, Austin, for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure, and something that obviously, like I said, I would prefer to be doing in person, but better late than never. You're someone I've wanted to talk to, I think, just in general, as an admirer of your work, but happy to get into it here. So I guess first off, I would say this is recording hot on the heels of your latest release, Streets of Rage 4. So congrats on that. It seems like it's getting a ton of love, good response, good, super solid reviews and player reactions.
Yep, it's very good. I'm very happy. Everybody's happy.
Well, I guess we can't beat that. I will start. If you wouldn't mind, I would love to kind of come at this from the beginning. Like so many people, I first became aware of your work when Remember Me came out, but obviously there's a whole history to you prior to that, and I don't know anything about that. So you want to just walk me through sort of who you are? I guess we'll put it that way. I'd love to just know, growing up, where the interest in games came in. Something about you specifically. I can contextualize this for our listeners. Is that you are very, very wired for games? Something that I admire immensely. You are not to put it bluntly, you're not somebody that sat around, at least my perspective of you, is not somebody who sat around drooling about wanting to be the next latest and greatest Hollywood composer and then sort of settled on games as if it was some kind of lesser field. You understand and seem to empathize with games and game design really, really deeply. And so I can only assume that means that you are a lifelong, diehard, passionate gamer. So correct me if I'm wrong. Either way, I'd love to just hear sort of where it all began with you.
Well, sure. It's about right. As you may know me, I've been advocating for, let's say, not music for game, but more like interactive music, which is like a more specific way of doing music for games. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. I'm not getting younger. So it's something that prior to being, a composer for games, let's say, I was already doing music on computers, and games have always been in my life, part of my life. And basically, I was studying math to become a coder. But it appears that after I was done with, we have like several, let's say, levels. And at about 18 years old, I was like, all right, I might not be the best coder ever, but musically
You mean
speaking,
based on exams or something like that, or you mean based on?
Based on the other guys. I was like, okay, they're better, and and it's I was like, okay, let's just find another way of making games, let's say, but on the side, or let's say, the other thing was music. And I was, composing on my own for, trackers and all these technologies that is now, lost. But it was great. And then, I happened to start my games and my career. And the thing is, as you mentioned, I'm advocating, as I said, like for music in games, not like as a lesser or anything like this thing.
No, not at all. It's the
film
opposite.
scoring. But as well as, let's say, inside the game industry, advocating for interactive music, which is a total different, let's say, aspect than music for games. So that's that. It's about, and I think it would be maybe interesting to discuss, you and I, about interactive music in general first, so we can let the audience know what's going on with this and where we all are, and why have been for 15 years now doing this. And I was not the only one, like a tiny very tiny bunch of people do this, but it's getting a little bit better. Lately more people are talking about this, more people, but and by the way, because yesterday I got this email, and I got this magazine, Game Music,
Yes, our friends in Poland.
Yes, from Mariusz, I don't know. And
Mariusz.
Mariusz, yes. And you wrote a piece actually about this. So, it was very interesting for me to read, and I would like to talk about this with you. So maybe you could, tell the people here, what was in there, so we can already talk about that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Let me get to that in a second, because I'm curious. You kind of glossed over, this parallel interest. Let me pause actually, because it blows my mind that we had a very similar kind of high school experience by the sound of it, because I also was simultaneously studying programming, like specifically, things like C++, HTML, Java, I'm trying to remember what else, even little bits of BASIC, just because I figured my path was to become a game designer and go get a computer science degree. And I had no idea that was true for you. You probably went further with it than I did. I didn't last long before I jumped ship and focused on the music. But I'm curious, what was the initial catalyst to music in general? Very few people, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's different in France, but in the US, usually when kids pick up music, it's kind of by force of will, either of the kid or of the parents. It's not an automatic assumed thing. Sadly, I wish it were, but it's not something that you just kind of roll right into. So where did that initial spark for music come from for you?
I guess, I was at the conservatory at 5, so it was part of my life. That was it.
What was your main instrument?
Main instrument was percussions, like classical percussions. I did piano and, all the thing, like the classical conservatory in France with all the harmony, fugue, and all the thing.
Yeah, I see. Interesting. I don't know that I would have guessed percussion. You have a very melodic sensibility to a lot of your writing, and so that very often the traditionally, or the cliche even, would be that often a composer, it turns out it's, they were either a singer or they played violin or they played someone who's used to having the melody and it kind of got beaten into them. So percussion is an interesting twist, although I guess if I were to analyze your writing, you are somebody who I think you are constantly playing with the sound itself. And I think that may be something natural, as percussionists tend to regard the entire world as noisemakers for their consumption.
Maybe. I think, I was playing marimba, I was playing, vibe, I was playing, so percussions is not just like banging on things, it's also...
Well, certainly not.
Yeah.
Were you also a jazz musician by any chance, as an extension of that, like vibes and things?
No.
So very classical.
Yes.
And yeah, this is interesting. I'm piecing together. Normally, I know these basics, and so this is in me indulging my own curiosity. And then my last question along that front is that because production is also clearly an important part of your process today, and there's a tremendous amount of detail in the way you actually produce recordings. That's something that often those with very rigorously classical educations skip over or gloss over. Again, maybe that's a difference between the various educational systems, but here it's routinely that you have classical performers that are absolutely brilliant, or even classically minded composers, but they barely can use notation software, never mind get into the production side of it. So where did you discover that side? What kind of led to the love of that, or what were your early experiments like?
Well, I think, it's a long answer I could give, so I'll do the short one. I think I'm a composer. I'd like to express and, just develop and find new things. Anybody that is creative, in my opinion, is trying to push. And so I'm trying to push on my own about the writing. But as I mentioned, I also push, and this is, I won't let go, about the interactive music. Trying to push.
No, I promise I'm not sidestepping that. We'll get into it. I promise.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, interesting. And then, all right, well then pivoting to that then, because obviously you were getting this, thorough education. You were also pursuing these interests. At some point though, the music and the music and games parallel interests converge, but it didn't just converge, as you said, in music for games, as is the case for, I would agree, the majority of composers. But at some point, it actually coalesced into interactive music. So is that just out of frustration for the general sort of lack of that, particularly when growing up? I mean, when we were coming of age, there weren't a lot of... it wasn't even technologically all that feasible compared with now in many respects. And those that were trying it were few and far between. Where did you discover that? It's not something that's sort of spoon-fed to a lot of composers. So where did this the obsession and the kind of passion for the interactive aspect, it had to have emerged somewhere in there?
Well, because I think it's quite the opposite. I think that at the beginning of the game era, you had, as I mentioned, like some trackers or MIDI or whatever things that were happening, let's say, accordingly to the gameplay. And then with the PlayStation and the rise of all these, let's say, state-of-the-art CD and DVD and Blu-ray, where you can, play music independently, sort of the action of the game, we lost it. So it's more like...
Right, true.
being aware of what the video game in terms of medium is about, and not trying to get, let's say, swallowed by the the fact that it's exciting to have an orchestra or whatever. It's exciting it's great. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just that I think we lost, and for a long time, and it's still happening now, we lost track of what is important into, and I'm talking from a creator perspective, to another creative perspective, to, let's say, the industry itself, like we're not done for anything, So
We're still children, basically learning.
Well, it depends. It depends on what you say this.
Well, in my estimation, I like to think of games as being currently like Hollywood in the 40s, where, people like Max Steiner had come along and made some very legitimate advances in the technology of marrying music to film, and the production process associated with that had really taken leaps and bounds. But very, very few people would say that the creative output of Hollywood music had peaked in the 40s. I mean, all the best scores still lay ahead, but the foundation was kind of more or less there. That's what I tend to think. Maybe I'm optimistic or idealistic, but I think we've kind of collectively as an industry laid the groundwork for a remarkably and sort of creatively fertile future. But hopefully our best work as an industry still is all ahead, and we'll look back at the projects of today and the generations back as like quaint experiments, but necessary first steps to take us forward. But yes, I completely agree with you. I completely agree. Once we hit around the year like 95 to 2000, the passion for recording orchestras, and once like Michael Giacchino comes along and cracks the seal for recording in Hollywood, and suddenly there was a kind of a lusting for Hollywood talent on these things. We moved away from game music as an extension of game design and became almost like an add-on to the game, or a parallel production. So yes. So then obviously, like I said, Remember Me became the first time you jumped onto my radar for a lot of reasons, and I'd love to get to that. But why don't you just give us a rundown on your career, and like up to that point, what were your first opportunities like, and where did they come from?
Well, sure. Before I'd like to make a point. I mean, at least to comment what you just said.
Of course.
Well, it's part true that games, and the people that are making games we're all, let's say, young in terms of experience, less and less, but still. But what is also true is that there is a difference between, let's say, reality of, let's say, how people in the industry look at its own medium and what the medium can offer to the people. And if you look at the last 20 years, for instance, music for games, if we focus just on that, has not much evolved. Do you agree with this?
It depends, I guess, how we're defining evolve, because to me, it's kind of fragmented. Like 20 years ago, retro-minded, nostalgic chiptune scores were not much of a thing, and now it's a huge part of the overall ecosystem. And so I see that as neither progressive nor regressive, but it's sort of like if game music is a body, it's grown another arm. And I would say that that's true not just in that sort of genre, but in multiple genres. So yeah, I'm not sure. It's hard to say. If you mean technologically, if it's not progressed, I would say that may be largely true. Like, we're still using the same fundamental techniques we've always used. They're tighter, they're more polished, but it's still essentially loops, triggers, stingers. A lot of what we do is still overwhelmingly based on a set bag of tricks. So I guess it depends what you mean.
No, but that's exactly that. And that's why for about 15 years, I sort of advocating not against this, but advocating that there was something else to be done. And that's the whole point, is like, I'm not doing this. I haven't done this. I'm doing, let's say, what you just said, like this general like say, mainstream way of most composers. As I said, a tiny bunch of people, where like I'm not the only one, of course. And if we want to start with the very beginning, let's say that somebody like James Hannigan in 2000. So I'm not talking about style of music or the fact that it's an orchestra or chiptune or whatever, because basically Hannigan did this with an orchestra. So in 2000, that was amazing. And so the point is what he established at the time. So as a pioneer, he's like, to me, he should be named, every time we speak about interactive music. But anyways, he installed something that 20 years later, as you mentioned, everybody's doing. And me, as I'm curious and, I'm me, let's say, I found, like 5 years after him, something like this, maybe 4, when I was working on my first games, I was like, oh, I'm going to push this, I'm going to push that. And then, it went on and went on. And I did another game called Alone in the Dark. And then, I pushed a lot. It was like crazy. And then I figured, I tried to talk about this with people, composers, developers, publishers, everybody. And it was striking to me that, number one, people didn't understand what I was talking about. Like, they just didn't understand. Number two, they weren't ready in terms of, everything, process, business, everything. And I can tell you, very easily that the majority of the people, of the composers, except a few like, Mick Gurdon, you might know, or,
of course, yeah.
Are, and it's not bad. I'm not, okay, don't take it wrong. I'm not saying it's bad, all right? It's not like this. It's not like, oh, there's the right and the wrong and the good and the bad. It's not this.
Sure.
It's just like, it's different. And I think that, it is something that I've been advocating for, I don't know how many years now. And since, maybe 3 years, like 3 years ago, maybe something like this, I started to find the right audience. I started to find the right games, the right, people. And so it feels like, yes, it is moving on, which is good. As I mentioned, more composers now are talking about interactive music, but mostly like, it's mostly as James was doing things 20 years ago that we're talking about interactive music. Most people talk like this. And it's very difficult for me to explain, and even more, in English, but to explain the fact that it's not because basically we're not like have two ways of saying the same thing. No, it's different things. We're not talking interactive music in the way I see it and I practice it is very, very different from a lot of people, like the majority. And when I say the majority, is a lot of people. And why am I this way? Why am I advocating like this? Why am I going to GDC and instead of showing off the Remember Me orchestra and the manipulation and all the craziness I did for the writing, I stick to how I did the interactive music? Why I get back to GDC for Get Even? That is only a technological talk as well. It's because I've been doing this for years and years and years to try to find a way to offer perspective to the young generation. Because maybe some people will switch. Of course, there will be like some people that will adapt to, let's say, different approaches than the big one, like the one that everybody's using right now, let's say the majority. But to be fair, I've seen young composers, I've seen young people understand and practicing music for games that even me, I was like, wow, that's great.
What would be an example?
They're trying things.
Yeah, let me expand on that. Like, what would be, because there's a lot that I can relate to of what you're saying, but I'd love to kind of dig into that perspective even more. What, as an example, specifically, let's say at GDC and looking at a younger composer just getting in, what would be something that you see that you think, hope for the youngins?
Well, it's like this. It's like, as you mentioned, of course there are things that we can relate, you and I, for instance, in terms of, okay, the way you do interactive music and I do interactive music. Of course, there are crossroads, no problem. But in let's say if you try to push, and to understand exactly what we're doing, you and I, it's very different. That's for sure. And the way is that when I get to the young people, the first thing, that they say, number one, they know the engines. Number two, they know how to use them in a way that, like they understand the deep down technology, and the last thing, is like they know games, because they're gamers. I'm not saying you're not a gamer, not at all. And it's not like, turn like all the other composers are not. But the thing is,
you're right there. I mean, there's a tremendous number of composers, even successful, very respected ones, that are really not much of gamers themselves. And I've always found that that's an utterly bizarre notion. As a lifelong gamer like yourself, who's interested in how they're made and the systems how they come together, I've always felt it. I think we're of the same mind there. It holds back the industry if we are not ourselves consumers of that industry and therefore sort of learning the ways that we can always be getting better and getting deeper in our thinking.
Yes, but there is the other part. So there is like one part, this is like, oh, you need to understand the medium by experience it, of course. So playing games, enjoying games. I mean, because if you don't enjoy playing games, don't force yourself. So let's just think that, okay, people like playing games and do that. But on the other part, which is like the more, let's say, professional part, it's striking. If you want to understand very quickly, it's like this. When James Hannigan created his music, interactive music, that has, you can go back, and look on the internet. He shares this for Republic. So it's about layers. It's about, vertical, horizontal, whatever you want to call this. It's about, like depending on this parameter for the game. It's incredible. It's live orchestra. I mean, and he designed the tool. Okay, so it's amazing. And then what happens is like 10 years later or so, the tools for games have been improved quite tremendously. And one of them that you surely know, everybody knows it, is called Wise from Audiokinetic. But you also have Fmod. You also have, and more are coming on the market. And if you look at Wise, and if you look at what it offers, and if you look at how every year they improve so much for the software, how do you explain that, 20 years ago, with a technology that was not as, let's say, spread out as Wise is, because Wise is free for anybody, can download this and practice, how come somebody that had to design its own tool, made something that has, it's not much improve. I mean, it did improve over time, of course, like Splinter Cell and all these games made a lot of use for, all the layers and things, and it was great. But it's just an extension of what he did. And right now, this is what we have. I mean, mainly what we have is just layers of things, segments that go from one point to the next, etc. So how come the people from the industry that should know about the tools don't use them to the extent that the tool can offer them more possibility? How do you explain this? How do you explain that composers don't do this? Why? Why do they upgrade Pro Tools or Cubase?
Well, the short answer is I think that that's easier. I think that because it's not just a matter of learning another tool. I think that thinking of music, to put it the most general way possible, I recognize that this is slightly reductive, but to put it the most general way, the kind of interactive systems you're talking about are non-linear. And to say non-linear music is almost like saying a married bachelor or a square circle, because music is definitionally linear insofar as it relies on the passage of time. So one of the things that's so remarkable and so exciting about game music and interactive music, kind of generally speaking, is that the linearity of music is suddenly now a parameter in play, no different than tempo, harmony, rhythm, color, texture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the various tools that composers have played with in music for the last several millennium. Now suddenly the linearity is one of those tools. And I think it's the biggest and most foundational new kind of like paradigm in music since the advent of recording technology over a century ago, which radically and permanently changed our perception of music back then as well. Since prior to that, you had to either make it yourself or be physically right next to whoever was making it. And by removing that constraint, an entire new art form of the recorded piece was born, and it forever altered our relationship to music. I think interactive music is the first time there's been that big of a seismic shift. And I think it's an even bigger seismic shift because it gets into the DNA of what makes music music. The result of which is that change is super slow, at least at first, because people like yourself and James Hannigan, and if I would humbly submit, like myself, who are really passionate about this, we're still very much learning the basic vocabulary of it. And the tools are kind of by necessity, I think, slow to evolve. It's because we're rewriting what music can be over time, we collectively. So that's why I think a lot of people shy away from it, because every time I sit down to write a score, I'm working on one right now where I'm trying some novel things that I've personally never done. I'm not suggesting I'm inventing new things. I don't know if I am or not, but I'm trying things that I've never done, specifically with regard to interactivity. And I try to on every project. And there's always a period where there's just this headache of trying to sort through it because it's so daunting. You know, the brain thinks of music, I think, or at least most people thinks non-linearly. You have to really reprogram your instincts to think in terms of this spider web of possibility instead of just a straight line. So it's kind of a long answer, but that's my answer to you. I think it's just simply a foreign language that everybody is still learning, day by day.
Sure, I agree. I agree on the part that it's, the number one is the linearity that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But, this is just one very, let's say, obvious aspect of it. We do have much more, and let's say, this approach that you're saying that you're doing and everything is the approach that is, once again, based on the music. And let's just say this. Let's just say that I feel, that most composers, what they do and the way they work with games is like they let the game tell them what to do. It's like they're following the game and they this happens, and we can do this either linear or not, or anything like this. That's not how I work. I mean, that's part how I work, because let's say that it's necessary. And as I said, it's a good thing, it's good. It's more, and this is when it starts to be a little difficult to discuss, because I think it's probably, I'm not the best one to talk about this. I guess it's people that work with me. But the thing is, it's not about this. It's about the technology that dictates what my music should be. And it's not just the fact that it's linear, whatever, or, the technology is much wider, much bigger than this. And games are technological object, if I may say, virtual object.
Yeah, of course.
So I believe that and that's why I'm saying that I'm one of the few, and there are other people, of course, that try to understand the core of that technology, how it comes to, let's say, create something that will set up rules for us that will go and enhance through music. So it's a path that is difficult to, let's say, expose like this, and it's very, very unlikely that I can do it in English. But basically, the thing is, it's very easy to understand that. It's very easy with the fact that if you look closely to most games, you'll see that although the tools have radically improved, and when I say radically improved, it's crazy improved. It's like, if you say to an artist that from the PC, the PC was like 256 colors back in the days, and now it's like unlimited colors, Well, it's kind of the same with the tools, the technology we have for audio, let's say, bigger than just music. And how do you explain that this, tools, plus the fact that the hardware has incredibly improved and evolved, that's crazy. Did you see the next generation consoles? I mean, that's amazing. And my point is, how come all of this happened to our industry, yet music is thought the same way as somebody did it 20 years ago, still now?
Well, I think there's a partial answer to that.
Yeah, sure.
Well, finish your thought. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, it's just like, it's one thing, and then we'll talk about the other thing. So, okay, I'm listening.
Well, I was going to say, I think part of it is that, part of the disconnect is that for us to innovate as composers, because you were correct to say that games are kind of a technological medium by their nature, we are reliant on the tech support of the team. And different games, at least in my experience, I'm curious how your experiences have been. Different games have different amounts of bandwidth to support the level of interactivity that we're talking about. I mean, some games that I've worked on, they essentially say up front on day one, look, these are the only parameters we're going to be able to give you to feed to Wise or whatever. And can we make do with those? Or like I was just working on one the other day where I said, wouldn't it be interesting if we track this variable from the player, but we also track this other variable so that, one can supersede the other in these specific instances, and that makes the music behave, X, Y, Z, trying to honor my NDA here. And it was, the CTO of the company was kind of like, I don't know if we'll be able to give you that data or not. That's not as easy as you might think. And so it's one of those where something that you can think of musically has a real limitation. And so you think, okay, well, we save that idea for another day, I guess. And I find that almost every project has some version of that at some point, where there's just the programmer team on the game side of it is just simply, they just simply have other fires that they have to put out, and you reach a limitation one day or another as to how much they can offer you. Does that feel familiar?
Yes and no. Yes, in terms that people don't generally understand or, react as, like a welcoming when you're coming with some, let's say, requests. But that's exactly how when the real work start, in my opinion, that's exactly where we should, composers or audio people, push. We should tell them why it's going to make a difference. And it's not just about the music. It's not at all about the music in the end. It's not about this. It's about the game. And it's about how you're going to experience the game. And it's much deeper than just having a melody, an instrument, a layer, a segment, or whatever. No. It's much deeper than this. So that's, what you're saying is true in terms of having a lot of people not willing, let's just say, to do this, maybe because it's impossible. But can I say that if it's impossible, generally, when a coder says no, I mean, you can find a way around. I mean, it's the worst thing ever. That's why I keep telling people, never make always make, let's just say like this, always make a friend of a programmer. You need to, I bring chocolate to them. I do everything. Yes, everything. So they sort of not like me, but just not dislike me, and because I'm always on their, let's say, shoulders asking for things. So,
yeah.
So
well, and to be clear, I don't mean to say that they're not interested or unsympathetic. I just mean that
but they are.
Well, I don't know. It depends, I guess, on the individual person. But in my experience, they very often are excited to pursue that. It's just that they also have other departments sort of asking for things. And at some point, if they have to choose between working on a game-breaking bug and helping advance the music system, they're going to have to choose one or the other. And I simply mean that at some point or another, we do reach that point where I don't feel like I'm done yet, but I kind of have to be done as a matter of practicality.
All right. So when I say they are, it's not like they're mean or anything. It's just that they are. When I say they are, it's like reluctant, and because many reasons, good or bad. And that's why, for instance, myself. So let's take an example, real one. Right now, it's no secret I'm working on Dying Light 2. Mm-hmm. And we spent a year and a half working on creating the systems. And they were asking me, when is the music coming? Yeah. And I was like, we're not ready. And we've been working, so hard, not in terms of music system or anything like this. It's not this. We've been working on the game. We've been working on, everything. And so I didn't write anything for a year and a half. And I happened to start composing just now because now we are ready. Point is, it's something that should come as a prerequisite, something that is like, you have to have this in order to create music, which is exactly, let's say, what I'm advocating for always, and what, let's say, the majority of the composers and everything don't, let's say, do, because for many reasons, I don't want to blame anybody. I'm not saying they're wrong or anything, okay? I'm just saying that it's possible. It's possible to be like at the very early stage of any production and to set up systems with the team. And when I say set up systems, it's not saying like, oh, it's like this or like that. It's actually doing them with them, because as a composer, you're going to create your own art form by the way the system will be done. And you will know everything about the system. So when you'll start writing the music for the system, you'll know exactly what to do and how it will react. And so, point is, you're right in saying that a lot of people don't take this, let's say, as seriously as it should be. And why should they do this? It's not because, as I mentioned, the music will be better or anything like this, because we're not talking about music composition. But what's going to be better is the player's experience. And from what I did, and from the results that we got, it pays off. It's working, and this is why I think I'm still having a career, because I didn't get any great games in terms of Metacritic.
That's a very funny perspective, but I think you're right. I think that there's no question. Actually, it's funny. I will admit, this is the first time doing this show that I have ever done anything that I might call preparing for the conversation, because I felt I was at a disadvantage since we haven't had the opportunity to hang out properly as I would have liked. So I actually, in the last few days, was playing Streets of Rage and Get Even and Remember Me and the Plague Tale in the last week. And because I've listened, I think, to everything you've released, like on Spotify or Bandcamp or elsewhere, since I became aware of your writing, and I always, follow what you're sharing online, because I saw a similar, almost like a kindred spirit when I saw you passionately tweeting about these things, because one thing that I say when I speak to students that I'm sure you would agree with is don't think of yourself as a composer working in games. Think of yourself as a game designer who specializes in music, because that's a very different headspace. It's thinking in terms of the player experience, but just where your particular tool set is the music that you bring, because that's what everybody else on the team, ideally at least, is thinking about as well. So everything you're saying, I'm kind of nodding along and agreeing to. But that's why I was asking before, out of curiosity, about those times that you've hit limitations on what you're able to do, because either the game is just not set up to support it, or the team is not in a position to be able to go as far as you wanted to. Because it's obvious that you're always going to be interested in trying and pushing it as far as it will go.
Well, I think number one, not every game should get, let's say, a special treatment. Some games can be very, let's say, conventional in the way they treat music. And when I say conventional, let's call it the Hannigan way. But if you start, thinking about, okay, I want to do something special here, and you encounter limitations, well, the limitations is not the people. I mean, if it's never been the people to me, never. And, I started like in 2002, 3, I don't remember, on PlayStation 2. And the people were like amazing, the coders and everything. And we pushed the PlayStation 2 under like very big stress to get the music. I don't want to go into details. And it's the same with Alone in the Dark, with creating a music system that was completely crazy at the time. And my point is, I've never encountered, when it was needed, limitations that came from the people. The limitations came from the technology. And that was when it was even, let's say, not better, sort of, because how we are. I mean, most of us, I guess, it's when you see a limitation, what you just want to do is to push and to be like, let's push it and push and push. And this is what we've been doing, and this is what I still do. And it's about, once again, the technology. And I agree with you the fact that composers need to think, let's say, close to design. Yes, like game designer, I'm not so sure, what game design, it's difficult, but let's say design. Yes, I totally agree with you. That's true. And but there is, once again, this other part that game designers, for instance, don't know about. And it's specifically for audio people. And as I mentioned, it's all those tools with incredible features that are just used. It's like saying this. It's like saying that you want to, like people are using Cubase or Pro Tools or anything like this, to record like, memos. It's like this. It's like, are you kidding me? Do you know what you can achieve with this tool? And they're just doing memos. And that's the frustration I got. And this is why every time I expose what I do, technologically speaking, because I think it's my, not duty, but let's say it's my main contribution to the community, for the gaming industry, for it to get a sense of, oh, yes, we can push for this, we can go there, we can do this. And bear in mind that now, the more we go through time, the less limitations we have in every aspect, every aspect. And at some point, and I'm not going to make some friends here, but at some point, maybe coders will be irrelevant.
Do you think because the tools themselves will just facilitate essentially doing anything?
Did you see Dreams? Did you see the game Dreams and what players can?
Yeah, absolutely.
What? You know what I mean? I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, it's happening. So that's exactly sort of the gap between sometimes the players that use tools better in a way, the tools that they offered better than the actual professionals with the tools they have. And that's why, I try to expose what are these tools, and I try to, let's say, educate as much as I can, with humility, what we can do with them. Yeah.
I think I don't know if coders will eventually become
No, me neither.
completely irrelevant, but
No, I don't think so.
I do think the spirit of what you're saying is probably spot on. Something related to that I've been finding myself thinking about lately is realizing that as AI becomes an inevitable part of the creative process, I think that, and an intriguing one, I think a potentially very powerful one, it made me realize that 100 years from now, the definition of a composer, or maybe of any artist, is sort of the author of the algorithm more than anything else. And I think for a lot of people, especially the very sort of pencil and paper, traditionally minded folks, there's a lot of folks that I think would be actually quite horrified by that idea. But I don't know. To me, it's no different than if you went back 100 years from now and said, did you realize that most composers won't be writing with pencil and paper anymore? There probably would have been the same reaction. But that's what music is. There's still, of course, people that say that still today. But I find that as the medium shifts and the technology improves, we have to kind of have our home base within that technology in order to truly achieve like the highest possibilities. That's my gut instinct, which is related to what you're saying, because the tools will invariably be self-propelling. It's almost like, especially with AI, you could almost have game engines that write their own engines if it really progresses to the extent that I know that they would like it to.
Sure.
That to me is. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go.
I have a very specific question. So, what were you going to say?
Well, I was about to say that it's good to look ahead, and think about AI and all of this. I don't know about that procedural music. Everybody's excited about this, and I'm excited just to see. But my regret is that we've been going through 20 years of exponential possibilities with so many things that we could have done and nothing have been done. And to look ahead, only, and not make a sort of a post-mortem of, okay, we may have, and when I say we, it's like not everybody, and it's, I don't want to sound painting, brushing everybody the same, but let's say the majority of the people have not done any, let's say, use where the technology was just begging for it, So point is, it's like the VR when it came out, everybody got excited. Everybody was like, it's the next thing. And I was like, but guys, we still have so much to do with 2D. I'm not saying VR is not good, but let's just not forget that we need to still try to find new ways. So that's that, And about music, and what is music, for instance? Oh man, I don't know. I don't know what to answer. The one thing, and it's not very popular among composers, what I used to say, but sometimes I'm like, listen, just imagine there is no electricity. Can you just play your music? It's the only way I can deal with the fact that is it still music or not. So either it's synth, either it's whatever. If we can get the substance of the music to either voice, piano, guitar, whatever, something that is not electric based, I think it's at least we have the core, the substance of what music should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting. That you show your I think your conservatory upbringing through a comment like that. I have a similar upbringing insofar as I was always trained to think that no matter, like when writing an orchestral piece, for example, no matter how dazzling the orchestration and all the bells and whistles and magic, if you can't boil it down to something on the piano or on a guitar or whatever, like you said, even just a voice that can get to the heart of it, then your piece probably is pure superficiality. And I hold that to heart, even though I recognize there are whole genres of music that would challenge that notion. And there are places where it doesn't boil down to the the conventional sort of rudimentary ingredients quite so conveniently. I mean, an easy example that a lot of people are familiar with would be Hans Zimmer's Joker theme from The Dark Knight, which is essentially one note. It's essentially just a sustained pitch, but it's the nature of the evolving color of that note that makes it what it is. And I wouldn't deny the power of it, even though I don't think you could really reproduce it without electricity, to use your language. So it's like, I mostly agree with you, but I do think that there are cases that fall outside of that, that are worthy.
No, I'm not saying that, writing to have one note, and if the cellist did it, so he got recorded, so he did it, you know what I mean? It's, it's like Aphex Twin, so it's a composer, like electronic composer. He's like crazy with electronic music. He's like the Mozart. I mean, I cannot. I mean, that's the one guy that I will always look up and be like, okay, there is, let's say, me and them, this type of people. And even him, if, all of his magic with electronic, I mean, he's the god, of this to me. You can turn it down to, very simple things. And, I don't want to debate about what is music or else or anything, and you're right. It could be anything in the end. It's just that what I'm interested in, and somehow it converged to what I do for music in games. What I'm after is the substance. I want to find the substance of, let's say the music I write, and make sure that the substance is good, as much as I want to find the substance of the game I write music for, so I know exactly what is this game about and how I can deal with this. That includes, on a bigger scale, the substance of the technology of video games. So that's me. That's, if you want to know me a little better, it's like this.
Out of curiosity, what is your process like on a project for finding that? Like using, because I was playing it so much the other day, if you don't mind, using Plague's Tale as an example. There's multiple ways to think of this notion of getting into the substance of it, because it's the musical, finding the voice of the actual notes, but then also it's the sort of more psychological of saying what is the function of the music within the player experience. And then there's the third level of the technological, which is how do we actually achieve that, and how does that potentially even inform the others? How do you kind of sort of penetrate all of that with the developers when first starting a project?
Well, the one thing is asking questions and never speak, and just listen to them as much as you can, because they have all the answers, but they don't know it, and you have to catch it. You have to find the right opportunity in what they're saying to you that will, sort of emerges for you, for the music. So, it's, and once again, and you said it very well, it's multiple layers of understanding. If you want to get one system that is very, very, let's say, simple for Plague Tale, and this game is, let's say, very close to what our dear Hannigan did, except for a few spots. So it's a very, it's a very narrative-driven, straight to the point game. Mm-hmm. However, there is one thing, and I'm not talking about thematic or anything like this, which is something, as you may know, is very important to me throughout the whole game. But I'm talking about the fact that the creative director says this: these are kids, and the enemies are adults, and they look frightening, these guys, okay? And you have to hide from them. It's a stealth game, so you have to hide from them, and they look like horrifying for kids. Okay, so you hear this from the creative director. Then you discuss with the game director, and he's like, oh, it's very, very stressful to get closer to them, because if they spot you, you're going to die. All right. And then you talk with the audio director, And he's like, oh, we have this parameter, with this, we can do this. Okay. And merging all of this and to get the substance of each of these parameters is, what did we do? We did something that we calculate the distance from the enemy. And the closer you get, so if you're away from the enemy, the music is kind of light. And the closer you get to the enemy, the music is going to get, number one, bigger in terms of density and lower in terms of pitch, to some extent that if you're very close, it feels like overwhelming, like this. And it's to capture both the fact that your kids and this thing is huge, the fact that the threat is very close to you, and the fact that, audio-wise, you have the feedback. So it's just like this, but that's a tiny thing, but I think it's very telling.
Was this kind of system proposed, or I can ask it more broadly. Do you find that the system is often proposed to you and then you kind of iterate it and work on it together, or are they looking to you to suggest to them? Like, because the way you described it was the audio director said, we basically have X, Y, and Z variables or parameters that we can connect to. How would you like to use them? Or are you able to say, I really want distance from the soldiers to be one of the primary drivers of what's going on, and they say, yeah, we can get you that.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's for a game like Plague Tale, it's very straightforward, so it's easy. And so now let's go a little bit further, away, and it's having knowledge of how you make a game. So you mentioned this already. It's about game design, it's about parameters, it's about values, whatever, variable. And so having this in mind, going back to the way you're thinking a game is on multi-layers, as we mentioned. So generally, this is what happens. People don't know, because they're not composers, right, how music can act onto their game until, let's say, they have a slight, an idea, and they can express the idea. But sometimes, and I'm pretty sure you've been through this, sometimes it's crazy. You're like, no, that's not going to happen. We cannot have a full orchestra reacting to XYZ. That's not possible. So the thing is, you as a composer, if you know everything in terms of technology, if you know everything in terms of relationship, if you know everything about your own craft, if you gather all this knowledge, you're the best person to suggest things. And once again, it's because you're listening to them that you can suggest. It's not you that will impose. It's them that will give you the opportunity to suggest. Yeah, and the way you're going to suggest this is that they might not understand, but they will trust you. If you can speak, if you can gain trust enough. But the thing is, for Plague Tale, as I mentioned, it was kind of an easy game to make. But games like Get Even, you mentioned, or Remember Me, or right now Dying Light 2, or Herald, a long time ago, or some games like that, were a nightmare to think about and to create systems for. And you must be naive, if you think that if somebody can make or create music and implement the music as good as the composer, let's say the composer is delivering stems and somebody else is dealing with them. It's very naive to think that this person will implement the music and use the music and think the music the same way that the composer would do.
Yeah, but bear in mind, all the time. That is a constant challenge.
Yeah, but that's why I do it myself. I did everything for Plague Tale. I did everything for every game you just mentioned. I did all implementation. So I was in full control of everything. So it's more work, but at least I know exactly what's going on. And I can, express all the music I want. And I think this relationship with studios, is something new. Like, not new because you have intern, like composers that are like in-house.
Right.
So they can do this. Surprisingly, most of them don't. I mean, some of them do, but it's a little better, I would say. But, man, I've been pushing for so many different developers, for so many different systems, for so many, being external, yet part of the team. Because basically, Dying Light 2, every day, I'm with the team. Right now, even in quarantine, I can't go there. But, I'm every day with them. I got the game, I got the build, I got everything. And I'm doing it. And it's the same for every game that I do. It was the same for Plague, it was the same. And I think this is, if you want to push, okay, don't take it wrongly. I'm not saying every game needs this. And I'm not saying that you should do that, as something like that's the way to do it. I don't think so. I think it's one way of doing it. But the thing is, to my understanding, is the results that it provide us with in terms of creators is something that I'm eager to see elsewhere, with new approaches, new way of working, new way. And this is what I'm after. I'm after people that can provide me with some, new type of, let's say, way of working, approaches, and it's very rare. I mean, 15 years I've been all around the world asking, it's difficult. And I'm not saying I'm the only one. There are people like David Garcia from Ninja Theory. You have Kenny, Young, he's great. You have, Mick Gordon, we talked about him. You have like some people like this, and I'm very happy. And the thing is, we need to push, everybody should push developers. But first, it has to come from the composers, because developers, as you mentioned, have another agenda. I mean, they don't think this way because it's rare. It's rare to have that. So if the more people try to push for this, the more developers will be open to this idea. And hopefully,
I find that there's a few dimensions to that problem, though, because it's not just a lack of full literacy on the notion of interactive music. I agree with you completely that no one will advocate for this on a team harder than the composer themselves. And so it's on you, the composer, to be that voice. I relate to that enormously. One challenge, though, that's related is, for me, the art of storytelling is a sometimes quite complicated one. And I have often found myself collaborating with people where they really seem to understand the interactive systems, but they use them. The metaphor I always use is, it's like a children's toy where you push a button and it makes a sound. You push on the cow's face and it moves, kind of thing. Where I say, yes, how, it's very nice. It will react to what I am doing and it will give me the sound that I'm after. But storytelling is not about being purely reactionary. It's about crafting an arc and actually telling something with trajectory and with purpose. And so I very often find, when we're brainstorming on ways to kind of improve our systems, often I'll get these suggestions like, oh, well, what if I just use that one cue here, but then we make it so that stem, gets muted if the player does this. And I say, well, what on earth does that have to do with the story the players experience? And I don't just mean narratively. I mean, there can be, I've certainly worked on games that are essentially non-narrative. It's about the accrued emotional weight and momentum. I said, you can't just be firing shots at random. This has to actually feel like it's going somewhere and it's actually leading to some purpose. And there's a mind behind it. And that part is where I very often lose people, because they are not, and it's not their fault. They're not really trained in storytelling. It was telling that my first collaborators from that game company, they were part of the cinema school at the University of Southern California, and they were taking filmmaking classes and screenwriting classes and things like that, in addition to all their game design coursework. And I think that made a big difference in terms of how they conceive of this stuff. And so anyway, it's just something you made me think of, because it's like everything you're saying is true. And I thought, yes, there's that. All of those are true. And the challenges you're describing, absolutely. And yet it's even harder than that.
Exactly. Yes, you're right. This is the premise into the next layer. You talked about this, the multi-layer aspect of the music in games, and yes, so true.
Is there a score of yours? Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just like you need to think, let's say, the detail of this transition as much as does it make sense to the whole game.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but that's the composer now talking. But I'm not. That's what I said at the beginning, and this is what I usually don't speak about because, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but composers should know how to do this. So to me, it's like, okay, you know how to write music, you know how to, it's I mean, of course, depending on the style or anything like this, but most composers and the games you're talking about are mainly narrative-driven games. So I assume that the composer know about storytelling and all of this. That's why I don't speak about this, because to me it's like, yeah, you have to have that in mind all the time. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. Unquestionably. I don't know if it's a safe thing to presume, though, because there's tremendous amounts of music that I listen to that I think I like everything about this, but I like it in a moment by moment way. And I never feel like it's taking me somewhere on the macro level. And so it sort of fails the storytelling, even though each moment, there's never any complaint at any point. It just doesn't, I just don't find myself feeling transported. And so, yeah, it's like juggling 5 things at once, basically, on any given. Is there one project of yours that you feel it sort of, it all clicked together particularly effectively, where you feel like you managed to really get into the systems as far as you wanted to, and the music told the story, in the manner I'm talking about? There was trajectory and there was shape to the music itself, and that the performances were everything you wanted, and et cetera, where it just seemed to all really come together, and you look back on it and say, that one seemed to turn out well. Is there one that stands out as especially successful creatively?
I'm sorry, no, and I don't want to sound like I'm full of me, but it's just like I'm very happy with like Get Even, Remember Me, 1111, Plague Tale. It makes sense from start to end, serving the story, because these are mostly narrative-driven games, and as well as serving the gameplay and the technology. I think Get Even is something that is very interesting in the way I use the technology, for instance. I think that's what I was doing, like, let's say, bigger and bigger games, and at some point I was like, you know what, the world of AAA might be not where I could try things, because that's the whole thing in games. I mean, myself, what I would to do is to try. Yeah, it's to to push, as I said. So I sort of went away from the big production, and I tried to find games that were more like open in terms of everything, and that's why I did these games like Get Even, Vampire, all of this, because Get Even, for instance, is maybe particular throughout all the other games, because I think technologically speaking, it's beyond all of them. But I don't think, it's my main, I'm not looking at this like, oh, it's my best achievement. It's just like, for the technology, that's the one you want to look up.
And what specifically technologically, because I was able to play it for about maybe an hour and a half, and it is
it's a great game.
I like it, actually. I like what I experienced. I like that it did not feel obvious, which I was appreciative of. It didn't feel like it was trying to recycle the same type of game experience that I've had.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not a great game. It's a great experience.
What is the differentiation there for you? Just as a quick side note, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's it's not about the fact that the game is fun in terms of mechanics or anything like this, but how you experience the game through audio, narrative, and everything. visuals is really amazing. I think it's one of the few. I mean, the writers are so smart. It's and the performers and everything. It's something that it's very mature, very very mature, but not mature like too gory or too serious.
You're speaking my language about that one. Mature is poetic. Mature is
well, it's about humans. For me, it's more about us. It's what I like. It's like those games. Most games that I do, they express something about us. Most of them. It's funny. People don't get it, but it's there. So anyways, yeah, and the systems get even. There is a video on YouTube where I show a bunch of them. There is 17 systems. And like the beginning of the game, you don't realize this, but it's just one bar going, through the first level. It's just one bar of music. You didn't feel it.
Well, I remember seeing that video, although I didn't remember the specifics, and like I was just present with the game while I was playing it. In other words, I was trying not to be overly analytical.
That's perfect.
But I definitely, some of your, like, have you ever watched? There's a TV show with these magicians called Penn and Teller. Have you ever heard of them? Or are you familiar with their show called Fool Us?
No, we're in France here. I mean, I'm in France.
So. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't expect you to come slumming into our American television, but no, they have a really wonderful show where here you have two truly superb stage magicians from Las Vegas that are basically legends, and they're also walking encyclopedias of the history of magic. I mean, they know everything about every major performer, every type of trick, and so they're real masters of the form. And they delight in it. They love it, and they created a show where they invite people to go up on their stage and perform magic tricks. And the whole premise is, can you fool us? Can you do something where we don't know how you did it? Because they know all the tricks. And it's really fun to watch because it's a wonderful exercise in sort of skepticism and critical thinking, and also just the creativity of illusion and deception, because so much of what we do is also about sleight of hand and about sort of luring the ear over here so that you can do something over there where they're not paying attention, and be kind of making things shift and move around. And at least that's how I like to think of it. I like to think of it in a way as being very theatrical. And that is very much the sense that I got from it's your work in general, but Get Even, it creates that impression where I thought, I can diagnose rather quickly probably about half the tricks I'm hearing, and I delight in the fact that I don't instantly know what you're doing with the other half. I have to really kind of analyze it, and that's always, to me, that's exciting because it's rare. It's unusual to not immediately see, okay, this game state change as triggered by the arrival of that enemy made the piece pivot to this, or it added this layer, or what. Like, it's usually very clear what's going on, even if it's very effective, even if it's very good. You just, because at some point you know most of the tricks. So that I can intuitively say I felt that it was technologically trying to push these systems. It comes through in a positive way.
But it was not for the sake of technology. So we have to be very clear about this.
Certainly not.
It's not
a tech demo. Well, go ahead.
Every time I do something using the technology, it's not to show off at all. I don't care. Actually, you know what? The best feedback I get is when players or universities, students, or anything like this study, analyze what I did. It's so funny, because you're like, oh my God. So they're trying to understand how I did it. They're trying to figure, and it's a very good sign for me, because I feel like finally, let's say, some people are trying to understand and to, let's just say, to understand, absorb, and reproduce with their own perspective, which is how we all do, like we absorb and we take it our own way to, deliver something a little different. So that's the best feedback I get. to get, for instance, Audiokinetic, the people behind Wise, asking me, to show how I use Wise, how I use, like they invite me to their conference all over the world. So it's the best feedback I get, because it feels like, oh, some people I'm saying start, because it's very recent, trying to understand the substance of the technology, although what matters is not this, it's the player experience. Because from the players, they're not talking the same way than those students and Audiokinetic, of course. Gamers are more like, oh my God, the music in this sequence was so, and everybody will have its own way of saying it, but in the end, it's like interactive music. You can be like, yeah, it's not about emotion. It's not about, they know it's about them, and when I say it's not about emotion, it's not only about emotion. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I again, I resonate with that. Similarly, like on Journey, for example, the best feedback I ever got was from people saying that they felt like playing the game, that I was essentially sitting in the room with them and composing it in real time around everything that they were doing, as if I knew in advance what they were going to do. Obviously, that's much easier on a linearly conceived game, but nonetheless,
the Hannigan way.
Yeah, like it wasn't. My favorite feedback was never, oh, I loved the music, but it felt like the experience of playing the game was almost alive and talking back to me. And
that's great. That's
the essence of what we're trying to do, isn't it? Like we want these systems
to
feel almost like you're on stage with fellow actors or something.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, but I think this is what James, I'm sorry, did, and this is why it's so successful. Because, and when I say he did it, it's not just him, but I take him as a milestone for me, because it's an achievement, really, what he did. Well, and the thing is, we've been using that, for decades now. So yes, it's working and players are happy. And this is why sometimes I doubt myself. I'm like, why do I bother? Why don't I do this? So it's, number one, easier. And number two, it's efficient enough on players. And then my, let's say, personality comes back and I'm like, damn it. Okay, I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to try to push this. Although it's going to be, it's horrible when I say horrible, it's not like that I'm suffering. It's just like it never ends. If you're part of a game production, that the last bit of the game production is the most, exhilarating, demanding, like crazy time. It's very difficult. And when you do things the way I do, everything is sort of working that way. It's like there is moments where you're like realizing how big all your IDs and all the systems are. And I must say, sometimes I doubt. I'm like, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? And, and it's a shame. When I say shame, I'm very happy to have done those games, but the game didn't do good in terms of, commercial or critic reception. But I had a fun time making them. I got great, relationship with the developers. We made everything the best we could at the moment, and I'm very proud of each of these games. So, it's sometimes, yes, sometimes I feel like I should let the young generation take it and be like, okay, it's your turn, guys. I'm done. I'm too old for this.
If that were, let's say, just run the thought experiment. Let's say you decided that. I mean, I don't think you're. I mean, to me, the notion of a composer below the age of 80 saying they're too old for this is very funny to me. But I also get it that you give everything to these projects. I mean, I can hear it in every last little detail. I relate to it. I can feel the same. Sometimes the smallest project that no one will ever sort of end up playing or hearing, you can just feel that it won't kind of explode out of the gate, and you hope to be surprised, but you can kind of sense it. You still just bleed for it, top to bottom. I understand this, but let's run that thought experiment. Let's say you say, okay, younger crowd, take it from here. What would you do then? What's your next move at that point?
Me on my own or them?
No, for you. No, let's just say they are going to go run and be the James Hannigan 2.0s and Olivier 2.0s of the world. Where would your passions or your interests take you if you decided to just let go of all of it? I've never asked somebody that on this show, and I realize I've never even found myself in a conversation of wondering that, because it's just always so much about what's next, and you've made me wonder something new here.
Well, I don't know. I think, if it's just, I think we're driven. Okay, I'm driven, you're driven. We can see this. We're ambitious. We're ambitious for a lot of things. I'm very ambitious for video games. I want video games to be, something that is beyond anything else. I think it's the next, it is the big thing, to me. So I don't know, maybe I will, I've got a lot of opportunities beside music, in the game industry. So, I might do something completely different. But as long as I can hold and make, music as much as I can give in this way, I will do it. Even if Dying Light 2 will kill me in the end, I'll do it.
Well, here's another one for you that's kind of in a similar vein. Do you have a kind of music or audio system white whale? Is there something that you have kind of been drooling after, as it were, but haven't been able to quite find either the right project for, or the technology isn't there for it yet, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't know I know about the way I work, and I want to, because, this conversation is very much turned over me, which is nice. But what about you? Do you have this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, it's about like the problem as I have diagnosed it, and I might revise my thinking or update my thinking on this as I get, as I get older, and as I kind of just try and do more things. And by the way, as a side note, I love the way you say that. Every time is an opportunity to try something. There's a curiosity, I think, in your writing that I relate to also. I aspire to the same. And that's part of why I've always enjoyed even just the music outside of the games. I can always feel that as much as your passion is for the interactive systems, the writing itself never fails to be curious. But that's just a tangent that I couldn't resist saying. But for me, as far as I can tell, the increased fidelity of interactive systems is something that I'm always trying to kind of push forward into, and to learn more about, and to find new ways to exploit. And as far as I can tell, there's sort of two primary avenues that I see that being solved on any particular given project, which is one, increasingly modular or procedural systems, procedurally defined in the most broad sense, because I've always thought of procedural music as being truly algorithmically driven, which is sort of by definition electronic music being sort of rendered in real time, which is really its own genre. And that's not quite what I'm meaning here. I just mean very fine-grained modular bits where you're breaking it down into such small bite-sized pieces. And that carries with it certain strengths, and also certain, especially from a musicality standpoint, that carries with it some enormous challenges and weaknesses. And so, but you can also do a lot, like you said. Get Even can be a single bar potentially that is flipping upside down and turning left and right, and yet from a linear perspective is actually very little music. So that's one approach that I see. The other approach, which is increasingly a challenge, especially as our production sensibility raises and it's more and more common to record orchestras and things like that, this is way more compatible with electronic music or with doing things with samples, but is if you can't get incredibly granular, then you have to just throw outrageous amounts of content at the game. Where, like we did a version of this on this game I worked on, Erica, where there's more content in the game than the game is, because we want it to have so much sort of branching possibility for the player that on any given playthrough, they will not experience all the content. We are intentionally making it so that certain things will never be experienced unless they make fundamentally different choices. They're not getting variations, in other words, they're getting entirely new ideas. But I remember one of my biggest frustrations ever as a gamer was playing Mass Effect, because I thought this music system is a disaster. The interactivity is so clumsy compared with how much I love the game, and it was so distracting as a result. But I also sympathized with their problem because the game was so huge and so kind of open world by nature, and it wasn't also the biggest budget game ever, especially the first one. And so they hit a brick wall where there's just only so much content they could throw at it. And I thought, I don't know how, short of procedurally generated music, they would have solved this problem, because you just can't put 10 or 15 hours of music in a game. So for me, my white whale is figuring out essentially how to reconcile those two things. Have a game that doesn't require sort of 15 hours worth of content, and yet it feels as though it does because it is constantly fresh. And there are a million ways to approach this, but I don't think the perfect solution has yet revealed itself. And maybe there is none either. Maybe I'm kind of dreaming of it the wrong way. I always am open to that idea.
Well, I think one of the answer is called Journey, which is like 2 hours long.
Well, yeah, or less, depending how you do it.
So, point is, you're right to think about, the fact that, yeah, it's impossible. It's impossible to fulfill, those open world or those, branching games with the exact amount of details on everything. But is it a problem? I mean, is it our problem, or is it, let's say, the problem of video games? Like the fact that it's going like for hours and hours and hours and branching, and I don't know about this. I really, frankly, when Journey came out, amazing things. And by the way, thank you for your kind words. But it was an amazing game, and I was so happy. I was so happy to see a form that was like a 2 hours long game. And I was betting at the time, and I was playing Skyrim, I remember. I was betting that now games will be looked this way. Like, oh, we can make a short game that is so intense, so full of substance. You know what I mean? Everything is, let's say...
There's no grinding.
Yeah. And I thought it was the next move for the industry. How wrong was I? But
I don't think it's entirely wrong. I mean, there have been major. I mean, one of my favorite games in recent years was Gone Home, and I loved Tacoma, also by Fulbright, and these are both also very succinct. I mean, yes, I agree that they're not the games that are on billboards at E3 and on highway signs and things with the huge marketing campaign. Of course, you're not wrong there, but I think there is a bigger place. There's an appreciation, because it used to be, and even Journey ran into this problem where players would say, "Wait a minute, I'm paying $15 or $20 or $30, and it's only 2 hours long," because they're so accustomed to dollar value or euro value or whatever equating to time as opposed to quality. And unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of Journey's audience realized I would rather have a game with every single minute, every moment, every second is purposeful and meaningful, than a game that half of the time I'm like checking my email while I'm just endlessly crafting, or I'm killing thousands of low-level enemies just to level up my character, and they're spending time in this incredibly monotonous way. I have nothing against games like that, but there's definitely, I think, an increased room for games that say, we don't want to do anything with that. We're not interested at all.
Yeah. And I believe, I agree with you, and I believe that it will come from the audience. I think that the games we're talking about that takes, I don't know, months, like hours and hours, are let's say, more likely to be played by teenagers. People
Sure.
like me, and maybe you, I don't want to put you in the same bag, but I'm getting old and I don't have much time anymore. I can't spend like 50 hours on, I tried to play Final Fantasy VII Remake, and, although it's fantastic on so many points, I was like, no way. It's like Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah.
I've been like, 7 hours, and I was like, man, it's perfect. I mean, there are video games and there is Rockstar. It's like, I don't understand. I just don't understand. It's this way. But the thing is, I cannot experience these games anymore, and I'm not the only one. And I think that although, me with my age, as a gamer, I don't have time. Me as a creator, I don't want to do, this is not what I did, but, a game with zombies, a game with like warfare, a game with, whatever, that is always about, having fun. As we mentioned this earlier, the maturity of the content is something that a lot of people from the AAA that, they're just leaving this sort of AAA side of the industry to create little studios, little development, games.
Yep.
To do something that is different, and they're trying. And I think in a couple, I don't know exactly. I can't predict anything, but see Journey, I was like, yeah, everybody would know. But the thing is, I predict that as the audience is getting older, there is a wide array of opportunities for developers to offer experiences that are totally different from those dragging experience for teenagers that have nothing else to do in their life yet.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a place for every type of game, and for those kinds of games that I honestly completely agree. I more and more associate those kind of traditional AAA games with something I played growing up, and I play less and less. I do occasionally have that I do have that itch every now and again, and I'll play, and like a game like the most recent Call of Duty Modern Warfare, to me, was actually kind of perfectly conceived in that way, because it's absolutely a AAA game in every sense that you're describing, but it was also like a 5-hour campaign or something, and it felt just right.
Yeah.
It's like I'm sitting down for this kind of a meal, and it didn't overstay its welcome, and it delivered on everything it promised, and I found it to be an incredibly satisfying experience. So it's like, I don't think I've grown out of enjoying those kinds of games, but I don't know that I could go much more than 5 or 6 hours. You made it longer into Red Dead than I did. I think after about 2 hours, the scope of it was so clear to me that I thought, I feel like Forrest Gump getting ready for his Trans-America run, and I just don't have time for that, as much as I admire it. And I think you're absolutely right. There are more and more players, since gamers are not all teenagers anymore. People want every different type of experience, and they want to experience things they never have before. I mean, look at a game like Celeste. Here you have a game that's incredibly challenging, but at heart, it's actually about like, depression and struggles with mental health, but realized as a platformer. To me, I can't fathom that they would have made a game like that when I was growing up. And so, to me, it's all very cause for optimism.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I'm very optimistic. Sure.
Good. Well, I not that you're creating the impression otherwise, but it's just it's fascinating to absorb. You've been very generous with your time here today, and I shouldn't have been surprised that you really wanted to stay thoroughly on this subject of interactive systems, because it only takes someone a casual glance at your Twitter feed to see that that's really where your heart seems to live as a composer, and I think that's really what's defining of someone being a true game composer.
Careful with these words. Careful.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I actually often push back against the notion of putting any word in front of composer, partly because I score films. I've worked in television. I've even done, TV commercials and what, especially early on, anything that helped put food on the table, I would happily do. Bumpers for podcasts or whatever, anything and everything, short films, on and on it went. But I do think, to the extent that one identifies as a game composer, it is very that surely by definition must come with an excitement for, an interest in, and an understanding of these kinds of interactive systems. And I few exemplify that, I think, more than you. You really, really do live and breathe this in a way that's not so common.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, you're a cross to bear. Yeah, it can be an unbelievable headache. We're experiencing that right now on this game, The Pathless, where our systems are surprisingly complex for a game that is actually kind of meditative in a sense. It's a high energy game, but it's sort of like a meditative high energy game. And the systems I was, like I said, I just kept nodding along hearing you talk about Dying Light, because I don't think I wrote any cue that's actually in the game for the first year to a year and a half of this one as well. It was all just proof of concept cues that were really there to test the systems, but they were like, look, this is musically garbage. This is there just to see how it feels when the system does this. And then now let's try what happens when it does this and this and this, and narrow down our approach from there. And thank God we have this much time, because I've certainly had the opposite as well, where, we had a month and that was not as pleasant. So, any last words that you want to share? Confessions you need to get off your chest or anything like that?
No, I think, I'm happy we had this conversation. I'm thankful. Thank you guys for the opportunity. Thank you, Austin, for the opportunity. I hope that people, that will listen to this, we understand that it's not like there is a bad and a right way of doing things, because it's not like this. It's more like we, as I mentioned, we are all different, and we should be different, and we should, let's say, push in our own way, for the pleasure of the gamers, because in the end, it's for them.
Well, I couldn't agree more. One last comment for people to find you on social media and Twitter and whatnot. What is the best way, or what is your handles?
Well, yeah, I guess Twitter. Yes, they can find me. I'm there like once or twice a day. I'm like tuck, because it's addictive. These things, it's addictive. Yeah. It's crazy.
So, okay, well, great. Well, with that, I will leave you. I thank you very much for this, and hopefully we'll have a chance to resume these conversations over a drink. I was hoping to catch you when I was in Paris this past summer, but I will be back again, pandemic or otherwise, come hell or high water. I refuse to stop seeing the world, and I definitely want to return to your country. And you hopefully will be in Los Angeles, or we'll see each other at GDC.
Sure, it would be a pleasure.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.